And I think that stirred up something in me, maybe as an 8-year-old, like, oh, I'd just love to live in the wild and go camping. G'day there, Dogman here, and thanks for joining me for another episode of My Cinema Experience. And what I'm doing on this show is looking back and trying to draw on those long memories of long ago of my trips to the cinema. And I encourage you to do the same, especially if you like me and you've passed the half a century mark in age. In order to maintain or help to have a healthy mind, healthy in the sense of being able to recall the past, a good exercise is go and look at things like the cinema. What was the first movie you saw? Can you remember it? Can you remember the second, the third? Trying to piece things together. And this is very helpful. I found it helpful for me because a lot of things can tie in. Like the cinema for me was a significant event. And then you look at the movie, then you can work out what year it was. And then you can work out roughly what time of the year it was. And then you can think, what else was I doing around that time? Who did I go with? These are the sort of things, they spark off memories. And I think that if you're not doing exercises like that, then I'm no neurologist, trust me. But my gut feeling is if you're not exercising your mind and your memories, you may lose them. And as you get older, and I aim to keep a clear mind for as long as I can. The other thing that I've heard, I read it in a news article recently, was that watching movies that you've watched before is actually a relaxing thing for your mind. Like it's quite soothing to know how the story ends. You don't have to stress out thinking, oh, what's going to happen? Who's going to die? You already know. So you can just enjoy the narrative as it becomes more familiar. And take, for example, a film like Star Wars that many of us seen hundreds of times. I don't know, probably not literally, but it's a film that I can watch, I can still enjoy, and it's like walking down a well-trodden path, like a familiar path. It's a high enough standard not to get bored, but you already know the beginning and the end of the movie, and there's no surprises. So they say that that's meant to be quite good for you. So when I'm doing this whole series called My Cinema Experience, I'm doing a rewatch as well and finding that enjoyable. And it does spark off memories. And some movies you think, I can't remember a thing about this movie, until then you do the rewatch and you go, yes, I remember now. And I reckon that's good for your mind too. So don't look at me as your doctor, but I'm giving you good tips, but I'm not qualified. Okay? So anyway, we're going back to 1980. I was 8 years old and I was in primary school, and I remember they loaded us all into buses and we headed off to the Geelong Twin Cinema, the Village Twin. And we all watched this movie called Manganinnie. Strange movie. If you're from overseas, you've probably never heard of it. And if you're from Australia, you probably also never heard of it unless you lived around that same era. And it seemed the thing that schools were doing, because this was a Australian-made film made in Tasmania, and it's centered around an Aboriginal woman who the character's name is Manganinnie. So I remember being in the bus, being excited, thinking I'm going to the movies. I don't often go to the movies. The bar has been set so high with films like Star Wars, it's hard to ever compete with that. However, just the experience of going into a movie theatre, sitting in the chairs, looking at the time they had the sort of velvet curtains that would reveal the big white screen, and just enjoying as the lights dim and the projector starts. Doesn't matter what movie you're watching. It's a thrill. It was a thrill for an 8-year-old. So this was an interesting movie. It's actually pretty much centers around virtually a genocide of the Aboriginal people in Tasmania. Not many of them survived. There's not many. Apparently there's not many original people left in Tasmania. So it's quite a confronting topic for an 8-year-old. So my actual physical memory, I remember seeing this lady keeping track of the fire. Keeping the fire safe. She had a little embers wrapped up in bark, and that was her thing to keep safe and keep the fire going. It looked harsh. At one point, I think there was snow, and I was thinking, how do you even live out in the the wild when it's snowing. It's so cold. And she was wrapped up in a lot of animal skins, which, is not your typical Aboriginal image that I had at that stage, because I'd seen some movies, not in the cinema, but some footage of Aboriginal tribes in the Northern Territory, like, in the desert where they hardly wear anything. So to have an Aborigine like fully clothed in all these animal skins was a little bit different. So that's pretty much all I can remember. Basically, she was being chased, her tribe got killed. Pretty much that's all I can remember about that movie. We came back to school and had a bit of a debrief, as in, isn't it horrible what they did to the Aborigines? That's why there's hardly any of them left in Tasmania. And, I think that is a good reality check for kids of that age. I don't know if they still do that in Australia these days, but maybe they should make a movie like that compulsory in the education system, so you can see, yes, this is how badly we treated these people. We hunted them down and killed them. Not we. I'm not putting myself in that camp, but the colonists who wanted to take over the land. And that gives you a better understanding of Australian history. A lot of Australian history, you can't trust what they say in the history books. You have to go and do some research yourself. But that's a whole different topic. So when I've done the rewatch, a couple of things to point out. I love the beauty of the countryside. Like, Tasmania is such a beautiful place. I've been there a few times. Some of the scenes, like when they're walking on the beach, I'm like, I've been to that beach. Recently filmed a reality series, Paramount it was on, where I think what's happened is there's been rule changes for a lot of these streaming platforms where they have to have a certain amount of Australian content in order to sell your product in Australia. So they've gone out and they've done some Australian type shows. One of them, it was a reality show called The Bridge, where they have to build a bridge over to an island where there's a prize awaiting. So that whole area where, there's a lake, and I recognise that is a location from Manganinnie. But it's really quite a weird film, because you're never quite sure the relationship she has with this young child. Did she kidnap this kid? Or was there a bit of this Stockholm syndrome where, after the initial kidnapping, then there was an attachment that, they become friends, and so then it becomes weird because the kid has a chance to go back to her family, but she doesn't take that chance. She'd rather stay out in the wild with this lady, Aboriginal lady. I mean, there's a certain amount of, it's sort of a romantic ideal, isn't it? Living out in the wild. And I think that stirred up something in me, maybe as an 8-year-old, like, I'd just love to live in the wild and go camping. And that's why I spent some years of my life just living rough out in the wild in Indonesia, camping on the beach, away from civilization. And to me, there's something very appealing about that. And there's one scene where they're in a cave at night, there's a storm, and there's like some bipedal creature, and it's, not really clear what it's meant to be. Is this like meant to be a spirit, or it doesn't look like a spirit, it looks like a physical being. I think this is meant to be a yowie, which is a Australian Bigfoot. The Aboriginal people call it the yowie. So if the Aboriginal people have a name for a creature, then we come and say that creature doesn't exist. Who are we to say it doesn't exist? There are a lot of yowie sightings in Australia. There's people that go trying to track them down, and they're elusive. You think, how could a creature like that live in such a civilized country? Well, you only have to look at how vast the bushland is, and there could be room for many undiscovered species because it's so big, so vast. Anyway, referring to the Internet Movie Database, or the IMBD, this movie has been voted for 177 times. Not a lot in the scale of other movies on there. So it's a real obscure movie. Hard to find. You can't find it on streaming services. I did the rewatch actually watching it on YouTube. So if I can find it again, I'll put the link down below. 7.1 out of 10. So those people that have watched it have enjoyed it. That's a fairly solid rating, 7.1. I gave it a 7 out of 10. I thought for what it is, an Australian fairly low budget movie, it's well filmed, it's interesting. Interesting story, and an important story. So what the blurb here says is, Aboriginal woman Manganinnie survives a black line raid which claims the life of her husband, Mina Pika Mina, and it He got nominated for 5 nominations in the Australian Film Institute, including Best Film, Best Director, Best Actress in a Lead Role, Costume Design, and Best Achievement in Cinematography, but it didn't win any of them. Too bad. The Australian Writers Guild is where they won an award, a major award. Must be for the screenplay. Interesting. Oh, yeah. So the best film in the Australian Film Awards for 1980 was Breaker Morant, which is like an Anzac film, war story of the World War One, I believe. Anyway, that's it for Manganinnie. Hope you've enjoyed this little expose, this little little feature on it. If you happen to see the film, please reach out, put something in the comments saying, yeah, I saw this film. Let us know what you think. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share it around, subscribe, and that will encourage me to keep going on this journey, which I'm enjoying anyway. I'll make these videos for my own benefit, even if no one else wants to watch them. You never know. It may resonate with people. That's it for the Dogman, signing out. Catch you later.